going to get started so we can establish quorum. The Committee on Licenses and Inspections will come to appropriations. Oh my God. The Committee on Appropriations will come to order, having established quorum. To my left, Councilwoman Blackwell. To my right, Councilman O. To his right, Councilman Allen Dom. Will the clerk read the title of the bills?
Bill number 180739, an ordinance amending Chapter 21, 1600 of the Philadelphia Code entitled Housing Trust Fund to authorize the establishment of separate subfunds to receive, respectively, revenues attributable to recording fees and revenues from sources other than recording fees, to provide for and authorize the manner in which such revenues may be appropriated and spent, and to designate the agency within city government responsible for administering the Housing Trust Fund, all under certain terms and conditions. And Bill number 180740, an ordinance authorizing transfers and appropriations for fiscal year 2019 from the Grants Revenue Fund, the Director of Finance provision for other grants to the General Fund, and the Director of Finance and the Housing Trust Fund, the Department of Planning and Development. And Bill number 180744, an ordinance providing for recurring funding to support equitable neighborhood development by preserving middle neighborhoods, constructing affordable housing units available for sale or rent, providing assistance to Philadelphians who desire to become homeowners, and directing council to appropriate revenue for said purposes to the Department of Planning and Development, Division of Housing and Community Development, all under certain terms and conditions.
The chair recognizes that Councilman Kenyatta Johnson has joined the panel. We will start with the administration, Ann Fadulin from Planning and Development, and Anna Adams. And then we have the next panel, and I'm going to change the order a little bit and have everyone come up, but I'm going to change the order so we can allow our advocates to go first, since folks have been waiting for a while, so I want to make sure we get through it real quick.
I just told you were going first. I'm going first? Okay. All right. It's just my, okay. I don't know if the button's working or not because there's tape over it. But it sounds like it's working. All right. Good morning, Chair Kenyatta Sanchez and members of the Committee on Appropriations. My name is Ann Fadulin, and I am Director of Planning and Development for the Department of Planning and Development. I'm pleased to provide testimony on Bill number 180739, authorizing the establishment of a separate subfund to receive revenues other than from recording fees and to authorize how those revenues may be appropriated and spent. As you know, Philadelphia is the poorest of the nation's 10 largest cities. Our poverty rate remains stubbornly high. These unfortunate facts contribute to our significant affordable housing challenges. Those challenges affect all income levels, but particularly those who earn less than 30% of area median income, or AMI. For example, nearly 150,000 Philadelphia households who earn less than 30% of AMI are cost-burdened, paying more than 30% of their income for housing. The majority of those households are severely cost-burdened, paying more than 50% of their income toward housing. That is why the city directs much of its housing effort towards these households. Multiple programs in the Division of Housing and Community Development, supported by a variety of funding sources, address the housing needs of families earning less than 30% of AMI. Those programs provide housing counseling, home repairs, and new housing units. Local and federal funds also support the work of the Office of Homeless Services and the Philadelphia Housing Authority. In fiscal year 2018, these city housing agencies combined to serve about 50,000 households earning less than 30% of AMI. At the same time, families earning between 30% and 120% of AMI face their own housing challenges. Nearly 90,000 of these households are cost-burdened. They also have home repair needs. Many are being priced out of strong residential markets, making our neighborhoods less diverse. Bill number 180739 provides DHCD with the flexibility to address housing needs at a variety of income levels. Where we see opportunities to support those earning less than 30% of AMI, we can act. And where we see opportunities to address the housing needs of those who make more than 30% of AMI, we can act there as well. Later this fall, we will issue our Housing Action Plan. That plan will include housing targets at a variety of income levels and strategies to achieve them. The flexibility that this subfund will offer will assist us in meeting those targets. Accordingly, I urge the committee to report out Bill number 180739 with a favorable recommendation. Thank you for the opportunity to testify here. I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have at this time.
Good morning, Councilwoman Canino Sanchez and members of the Appropriation Committee. I don't know whether mine's on. My name is Anna Adams, and I'm the Budget Director for the city. I'm joined at the table by Rob DeBow, the city's Finance Director. We're here to testify in support of Bill numbers 180740 and 180744. Bill number 180740 transfers appropriations from the Grants Revenue Fund into the General Fund within the Office of the Director of Finance for a $19.1 million payment to be paid to the Housing Trust Fund, and creates corresponding appropriations within the Housing Trust Fund to support the affordable housing initiatives contained within the upcoming Housing Action Plan. Our colleague Ann Doolin, Director of the Department of Planning and Development, who's also here to testify, can provide information about the goals and programs contained within the plan. Bill number 180744 contains the administration's commitment to provide recurring funding to support equitable neighborhood development and the programs within the Housing Action Plan within the FY19 budget and the FY19 to 23 five-year plan. The bill contains the projections included in the current five-year plan of the amount of property tax returning to the rolls from expired abatements. The administration will calculate this amount ahead of each year's upcoming budget and will include the calculated amounts as an appropriation within the Housing Trust Fund in each year's operating budget. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. We respectfully request that these bills be reported out of committee with a favorable recommendation and that the rules of council be amended to support first reading at the next session of council. We're available to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you. And I don't want to get into a long conversation about the Housing Action Plan, but Ann, real quickly, how is that going to be presented and how is council going to be engaged in a public discussion?
So we are currently having briefings with various council staff members. We had one on Monday. We have another one scheduled for tomorrow to review some of the preliminary findings and the initial draft. And then that final draft will be presented at the Housing Advisory Board meeting on October 10th at 10 a.m. at 1515 Arch Street on the 18th floor in the Planning Commission room. And that is a meeting that is open to the public.
Okay. And post the briefings, how do you intend to present that plan in council?
We're going to then release the plan. If there's a special briefing that you would like to have, that's fine. But like I said, we're having briefings with council staff right now, and then we've had briefings with them throughout the process of the plan. Also, council staff have participated on our stakeholder groups. And if there's another briefing that's required, that's fine. But we plan to roll out the plan by the end of October, and then it's really sort of a roadmap or a guiding document that hopefully then we all work together to figure out how do we implement and achieve the housing target goals that we've laid out.
The comp plan process allows for council to approve the plan, so this would be a little different. So I think we should have conversations about how the plan rolls out. I read with interest the mayor's presentation that was his plan, and if it's going to be our plan, I think there has to be some sort of way for there to be a public discussion in this forum.
And we're open to having that.
Okay.
And like I said, all our Housing Advisory Board meetings have been open to the public.
Okay, thank you. Chair recognizes Councilman Dahl.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, and good morning.
Good morning.
I have a few quick questions. How much is currently in the Housing Trust Fund today?
We currently have about $35 million in the trust fund, although all of that has been allocated to either specific projects or programs.
Are those the projects that we have in the handout, the supported projects, Housing Trust Fund supported projects that total 35.9 million, or is that different?
35.9 million, I'm
We
sorry.
have-
I have only one hearing aid working today, so I'm a little,
It's okay.
at a loss. So the 35.9 million, yes. I have seen the sheet he has, but I don't have it in front of me.
I actually have a question on that sheet. I'm just trying to understand what's going on. I'm going to pick as an example, Casa Indiana. I just want to understand. It says city, it says 8/17, close 1/19, so I guess it's closing in January?
Yes.
Okay, and it says HACE,
ASE, that's the nonprofit, the development entity.
and it says $2 million.
Yes.
How many properties are we working on there? It says it's in the rental. How many properties are being developed or redeveloped for that money?
With the ASE money, the Casa Indiana?
It's a mix, it's in my district, it's a mixed development project. I think it's about 40-something units with commercial space on the first floor.
So the only thing I would recommend going forward is if we could have that detail on this information, so we could at least know $2 million is being spent for 40 or 50, whatever the number
Okay,
is.
so we can get you actually a breakdown of, because we have that. We have a spreadsheet that shows all the projects that have received an allocation, how many units they are, the families that they're serving, the address, whether, I should say, what the population is they're serving, whether they're family, whether they're senior, whether
That'd
it's
be great,
special needs, we
yeah.
can get that to you.
Because you have one here that says 2 new projects, anticipated city award of 9 of 18, which I guess is now, and it says $4 million.
Right, so we had 2 recent RFPs out on the street. One was for 4% tax credit deals. We awarded $8 million under that RFP. We have an open RFP, we have another RFP that was out on the street, preservation projects. That RFP is closed. There is a review meeting for those responses scheduled for Friday, and then award letters will go out for that. I believe on that sheet, there's a certain allocation for preservation projects, so that money will be allocated, I want to say probably if not next week, the week after. And then we have an open 9% RFP on the street right now. Those applications are due October 12th. We will probably award sometime in November as applications are due into PHFA shortly. We try to coordinate it as to when the tax credit applications are due to PHFA.
Here's what I'm trying to get to. If we're going to invest $4 million, how many people is that being invested? How many homes are being helped in that $4 million?
Yeah, so we can give you that spreadsheet as well that shows. I mean, for example, one of the 4% deals I think is over 100 units just in and of itself, but we can get you, we have all that information, we'll get it to your office.
Okay, thank you. And the other question I had was, on this money that's being appropriated as part of the bigger package of abatement money that's burning off the 52 million. And so my question, I guess maybe to you, Rob, or Anna, is that I know that you guys are very good at allocating future revenue, so I'm wondering which pile of requirements that money's coming from.
So,
Your name for the record.
sorry, Rob Dubo, Finance Director. So as you know, I mean, we don't take a specific property tax dollar and put it to a specific department. It goes into our overall pot. So it doesn't really work the way you were describing it. As we go into the next 5-year plan, we'll have to kind of look at how we can make the plan work with these dollars going out to affordable housing. And we're confident that we'll be able to do that.
But on the road to 80%, you did allocate future revenues based on funding pensions. So, I mean, we do allocate future dollars in the plans.
So there was state legislation that required that sales tax money go to pensions. So if there's specific state legislation that requires us to allocate money, then obviously we do that.
So you're saying to me that this $52 million that we found in the left drawer that we pulled out of somebody's desk, okay, wasn't allocated for anything?
That's not what I said. What I said is that we don't specifically allocate property tax dollars for a specific item. It goes into our general fund, and we make budgetary decisions based on the total amount of funding that we have available.
Right.
So over our 5-year plan, we will have $53 million less, and we will figure out how to make the plan work without those revenues.
Because some of the comments I'm hearing from people is, how did the city find $52 million?
So what's interesting is that whenever we propose a new tax, people say, why don't you find money within your budget? And now that we found money within our budget, the question is, well, how can we
Now we're
find
going to ask
money
you for
within your
more.
budget?
That's huge. If you know you can find 52, we're going to ask for
So
100.
whatever we do, people are unhappy with us.
No, I just want to make, here's my point. I want to make sure that we're not taking from one area, that we're going to wind up short because we allocated here.
We're not.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
I think when we have our next appropriations hearing, we can speak to the fund balance and the fact that obviously revenues are higher than projected. Councilman O?
Thank you very much. Good morning. As I understand it, and I could be wrong, but as I understand it, we currently service about 50,000 of the 150,000 cost burden households earning below 30% of AMI. That's about a third of who needs help. We're serving a third, 30% below AMI. And my question is that are we expanding the universe of people that the Housing Trust is trying to serve, and in doing so, taking on an even larger obligation that requires more funding, more tax dollars from households, which I believe is one of the reasons why people are struggling in Philadelphia. The government is over-assessing their properties and taking their money. But, you know, I understand that, though it seems counterintuitive, that by expanding the flexibility of the Housing Trust Fund, that there's a method to servicing more people under 30% of AMI. I'm not completely clear on that. Could you explain that?
So I think the question is, if we serve people that are anything over 30% of median income, are we adding to our, I guess, expectations from the government about who we will serve that has housing issues?
I'll put it in two ways, because I'm trying to be fair, and I'm not trying to be artificially fair, because I actually don't really know the answer.
I'm just trying to understand the question.
The question is, there's 150,000 people who have housing issues who are 30% below AMI, and currently you're serving 1/3. So there's 50,000 you're serving, 100,000 that you're not. Now expanding that universe of people that you're serving would appear to delete or reduce the amount of services this population, 30% below AMI, it would dilute the services that they're receiving.
So the concern is, if we have dollars that serve anybody over 30% of median, that we will then be serving less people that are at 30% of median?
Yes, and
Okay.
to be fair, what I understand is there is a methodology to this whereby by expanding the universe, you will get more dollars to people under 30% of AMI. But could you explain that? How does that work?
So I just have to say, the reality is that the city has, across income spectrums, way more need than resources. And even with these additional resources, we will still have way more people that need housing than we have resources to address them. I do think that we try to have a predominant amount of the dollars available to us go to serve our most neediest families. But we also know that there's some things that we need to do for some of our other folks that will help prevent them from possibly becoming some of our neediest families. For example, the home repair program that we're laying out, now that we're just starting to roll out, that's a loan program. That's for people over 30% of median, some that can take off a loan. But if we don't do those home repairs, we run the risk of those folks, not being able to make those repairs for themselves, and those houses may fall apart around them, and then they've become homeless. So they've gone from being a homeowner that has some asset to now being not having a place, and we've, by not dealing with them who may have a little bit of a higher income, we may be now adding to the issues. So I'll be honest, it's sort of a constant fight and a constant battle to regardless, we are putting our finger in the dike. That's what we're doing, regardless of these income levels. And the resources right now is we're just doing our best to keep that dike from bursting on a lot of different levels.
Okay, so what I hear you saying, correct me if I'm wrong, is that there's a big need. You are focusing on households below 30% AMI, and you're trying to do preventative actions where possible so that people who are on the verge of becoming homeless do not become homeless as kind of a preventative type application. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I mean, we're very, we're very fond of saying we think there's a lot of truth in our best method is to keep people in the homes they already have. And so, yes, that's very much one of the focuses that we have.
Yeah, I was listening to the radio the other day, and somebody said, I didn't see this myself, that the median value of a home in Philadelphia is $154,000. And I know that the median household income is about $37,000. And I wonder, because of this whole issue we're dealing with OPA, that the value of the homes exceed their actual value, and therefore you have taxes on people that are too high and they're struggling to pay. And my question is, when you look at the rising assessed values of homes throughout Philadelphia, the increasing burdens on the families and the homeowners, how would you address that? It would just indicate to me that you have people with needs at the lowest end that aren't satisfied. You have an expanding population of homeowners on the verge of being homeless. You have increased burdens placed upon them by the city government. How do you come up with a methodology to deal with that continuous problem? So
I have to say, I think this council and this body has been pretty proactive around that with all the various, taxpayer relief programs, that property tax relief programs there are. The homestead exemption was increased, and I think you guys probably have a little bit more detail on this than I do, but I think LOOP and UPA were both extended, and that if homeowners are feeling that tax burden, particularly low-income homeowners, if they reach out, there's probably some type of program that can help them either spread those payments out or lower those payments or not have a lot of that payment due until such time as the house may be sold. So I think there are a lot of protections like that in place, thanks, again, because there's been a lot of proaction around that from City Council. Right, and then there was additional funding added in this year's fiscal year budget to do more counseling and more outreach about those programs, because I think, frankly, now the challenge isn't that we don't have programs, it's making sure that everybody who's eligible for those programs knows about it and takes advantage of it.
So the administration is testifying today that these amendments, these changes, these bills will be part of a solution to the problem, and you're clear on that.
Yeah, I would like to emphasize, these amendments and these bills are part of the solution to this problem. I don't think they're the solution, but they are definitely part of it and definitely a step in the right direction.
Okay, thank you very much.
Sure, thank you.
Thank you, Councilman Knoll. The chair recognizes Councilman Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just had a couple questions for Ms. Fadulin and also Mr. Rob DeBoe. So, Ann, recently, an article in the think it was the Daily News that talked about the city of Philadelphia building 100,000 new homes by 2028 as a part of the plan that's going to be forthcoming in the near future. And so a lot of my constituents asked me when they saw this article, Councilman, what's the strategy to make sure that a significant portion of those houses are geared toward those who are not just affordable and workforce housing, but specifically also low-income housing, because oftentimes we skip that low-income conversation and go straight to workforce and affordable, but there's a low-income population of people who live in deep poverty who also would like to stay in the city of Philadelphia. And so can you give us at least a brief overview of what's to come in terms of how you're going to address that issue? And then to Mr. DeBoe, you know, obviously there were two proposals on the table. One was the construction tax, and then we came up with a compromise to do funding through our general fund to the housing trust fund. And when I'm out in my community talking to constituents, and what's brought to my attention that is because it's not new money, how is it going to have an impact on other city services, such as the libraries right now, where we're currently facing staff shortages across the city of Philadelphia, particularly in poor neighborhoods, which was recently reported by the Inquirer in the editorial. And so can you just also say for the record how those resources will or won't divert from services that we can offer the city of Philadelphia through our city agencies? So if y'all can answer those two questions, please.
Right. So let me answer the first one. So let me just say that the headline in the newspaper was very attention-grabbing, but not exactly accurate. So we are calling for an aspirational goal over the next 10 years to either produce or preserve 100,000 units, all right? So some of those will be new, but some of those will be also preserving, which, you know, was kind of the conversation we just had with Councilman O, and that's across the board, so that there's a certain number of homeless units, you know, homeless beds or moving people out of homelessness into permanent units, all the way through market rate units that make up that overall number. So how do we want to get at very low income? And I want to say I appreciate you asking that question, because I think you're exactly correct. There's a lot of conversation now about affordable housing, and the definition of affordable housing has really grown. And there's a lot of conversation about moderate income and low income. And I really, this is a pet peeve of mine, frankly, because I think at the national level, very low income has really dropped off the charts. And nobody is really talking about deep poverty, which is what we experience here. So I think to answer that question about how do you address that 30% of median or below, again, you know, thanks to the transfer tax, we were able to float a bond that allows us to provide home repair grants to that population. We are continuing that. We actually just had a conversation internally before we came to this meeting about, because we're doing that, there's been more need coming forward with emergency repairs, and we want to try to figure out if there's a way for address this increased need. And so we're going to be looking at that. You know, we're going to continue with our tax credit projects, which help to get at more lower income, and we're looking at things like, you know, can we do some kind of a shallow rent subsidy? I mean, I think we're trying to look at different programs and different ways to do that to try to get at that. Again, I will be very clear that these additional dollars and this flexibility helps, but will not solve the issue that we're dealing with. For example, you know, and I know there's also been conversation about money that we have, and is there money sitting there that's allocated but hasn't been out the door yet? In 1965, we got $200 million from the federal government in block grant money. Exactly. 1965. $200 million. I mean, I'll tell you right now, I'm not smart enough to do the math in my head, but adjusting for inflation and all that, think how much money that would be today. Somebody determined that we had that need back then. Our need has not lessened, and our country has not gotten poorer. But to this year, we got $42 million. Right? So I appreciate having a conversation about what are we doing to address, you know, at every income level, whether it's moderate, whether it's low, and also very low, because I appreciate the effort that has gone into getting these additional dollars, you know, but the reality is without these other strong partners, it's very difficult for us to deal with this issue on our own as a locality.
If you allow me, Madam Chair, do we also, from a leadership standpoint, engage with those who are building the low-income housing for PHA to provide us a level of relief in terms of the cost versus the actual unit?
Right, so you will,
The trade specifically?
we haven't come out with our housing action plan yet, but you're getting a definite preview. We are looking at, the plan that talks about all of that. How do we reduce cost? How do we do different construction methods? How do we get some help from our brothers and sisters who built those units at maybe looking at reducing costs? So I think we're looking at that angle. We're also looking at some of the requirements that in order to get some of the other dollars that we get, can we sort of have a little more flexibility on those requirements? Because quite frankly, things that we are required to put in affordable housing, a lot of luxury housing does not have, and it's not that we don't want quality affordable housing that we're building, but if it means that, you know, in order to build a unit, we have to have X, Y, Z, and that means instead of, you know, 100 units, we're only able to build 20 units, that doesn't make a lot of sense, right? We want to try to use that money the best we can. So yes, we are looking at construction, we're looking at cost savings, technology improvements, all, like anything, frankly, that we can think of is things that we're going to consider, because it's going to take everything to try to deal with this issue. And also, I want to be clear that even though 100,000 is an aspirational goal, it still is a step in the right direction, but does not resolve the issue that we have.
I'm glad to hear that we're going to look at the cost of the building, and I do look forward to some real leadership from the building trades component about looking at modular housing and all the other options that the city has resisted in the past to bring down the cost per unit, the square footage cost per unit. And I know that in the past there have been issues with HUD and whether HUD approved it. There's no reason why we don't have a voluntary residential rate. We don't have a voluntary residential rate for affordable, right? Other than political will. So I absolutely look forward to that part of the discussion. Chair recognizes Councilwoman Parker. Oh, he turned it off.
Thank you.
Hold on, the councilman said he wanted Rob DeBoe to finish something, and then I'll recognize. He had turned off his light, so.
So I think I'll tackle that. So one of the challenges in our budget altogether and in Philadelphia is that everything in our budget and all the expenditures that we make in our budget are to tackle probably the biggest impact, which is poverty. And so as we put the budget together, the issue of tackling poverty in the short term, medium term, and long term, I think is the lens in which we make all of our trade-off decisions. And so as we're putting the budget together, and as we will put the next budget and the next 5-year plan together, affordable housing and the strategies that Anne's talking about are kind of one component of a broader strategy, I think, that we're trying to tackle in terms of dealing with poverty and the challenge of poverty. And so libraries, homeless services, police, fire, EMS, everything that we sort of do as a city is impacted by poverty. And I think that as you'll see when we put the next budget together and the budgets that we've already put together, kind of look at all of those things within the limited resources that we have, and we will constantly be making those trade-offs. And unfortunately, we don't have enough resources to do everything that we would like to do or want to do, but that's where we kind of prioritize. And so in this conversation about the need for affordable housing and the need for all the programs that Anne has laid out, I think this is where we're looking at that this investment is a really high priority for the administration. And so the trade-off between this and other things are that we are prioritizing this 19 million and the future revenue that we've laid out, the 53 million over the 5-year plan, as something that we think is really critical. And that's not to say those other investments aren't also very important, and we're going to be looking through all of the department's budgets, and we want to analyze the impact of improvements to services. Should we add additional resources here? Should we take money from other resources that aren't maybe functioning as well as we would like them to do? And that's part of what we do all the time. We're in the middle of target budget conversations right now to make sure that we're allocating it correctly, but it's a constant trade-off.
Was the 70 million in terms of your future projections of the money that will come off of the 10-year tax abatements, was that already projected in other areas to be spent?
So this 53 million, I think there's another 20 million that's
It's a total of 70 over 5 years, correct? 70,
So the
71?
53 is just the portion related to the abatements. I think there's another
Okay.
revenue source that kind of is projected to generate that 20
That's your
million.
bill, correct?
That's right.
Okay.
So the 53 million
It's
is a
100 million.
100
calculation
million.
related to how much of abatements are rolling off each fiscal year. And so the 19.1 million is basically saying how much in FY19 are we projecting to receive due to abatements rolling off
I'm
the 10-year
clear on
abatement.
that, yes. Was that money targeted?
So
And you
this
had
is
to
now what
reshift it?
we are calculated within our budget. As Robert had this conversation with Councilman Dom earlier in the hearing, all of that money goes into the general fund, and from there we make allocation decisions. So it wasn't targeted, it wasn't sort of specified for any specific project beforehand. It just goes into the general fund, and from there we make our budget decisions.
So our practice is to project a significant amount of money that will come off of tax abatements per year, but it's not targeted toward anything, it just goes straight into the general
It goes
fund.
into the general fund, and from
Okay.
there we pay for police, library, parks and rec, fire, EMS, homeless services, all of the other city services that are in the general fund. That's where all of our revenues are general fund revenues, most of our tax revenues. They go
That
into the
part I
general
know,
fund, and
but
from
it's
there
not
we make
targeted.
expense.
I mean,
It's
I
not.
know it goes in the general fund, but it's not, so you're saying it wasn't planned
It
to be
just
utilized?
goes in
Okay.
within and it pays for all of
pot.
our services, just like the wage tax and on the other
Okay.
And
revenues.
this legislation really changes the way we're viewing the property tax abatement, the properties rolling off abatements. So now we do view them as going into affordable housing, whereas before they weren't.
Before we
considered
just,
anything.
okay, all right, well, thank you.
Thank you. Chair recognizes Councilman Squilla and wants to thank him for all his work to get us to this point. He is not a member of the Appropriations Committee, but he is definitely a member of the team.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Appreciate that, and I want to thank the council leadership, Councilwoman Sanchez, and also the administration on being able to work together to come up with a compromise. Again, not everybody went away totally happy about everything that went into that, but I think it is a start, like you said, and not 100,000, but 100 million was the initial thing. But when you talk about the housing plan, and I'm glad to hear where we're headed, because we never had one before, right? And it's always been a concern of, what is the plan? What is our master plan moving forward? So this is a good step in the right direction. So the Housing Trust Fund piece that we're doing now is a good step in the right direction. The housing plan is a good step in the right direction. And I think we need to keep, as Councilwoman Sanchez says, keep the dialogue open with council and administration to be able to work on this together, to be able to push this plan forward, because it's easier to get things done when we're all moving in the same direction and we're not pulling at each other. And we see what happens when we don't, and we also see what happens when we do. So it really is important to do that. When we talk about the Housing Trust Fund, and I know people are interested in the sub-fund and how that works, the initial dollars that is in the Housing Trust Fund now, the $35 million, how it's allocated for, is there, and I know the answer, but I just want you to say this for the record, money that's being used, is there projects that are looking for that funding and do not get funded?
Yes.
And how many projects would get funded, say, per year with Housing Trust Fund dollars?
So that's a little bit of a complicated answer, because some of that money goes to things like basic system repair, not all of that money goes to projects. But I would say in general, in the city, probably we get funded, let's say 7 to 9% tax credit projects, and probably another 1 to 2 4% tax credit projects. And then maybe we get funded a handful of preservation projects. Some of those go in for tax credit for recapitalization. Some of those are just things like they need a new boiler. But I would say we are probably, in general, able to fund about a third of the projects that come into us for soft money, you know, to partner with tax credits or something like that. So usually we get in, you know, let's say 30 to 35-ish our projects, and we can usually fund kind of around a third of those.
Do you feel that the additional dollars in the Housing Trust Fund or the sub-fund will increase that number?
I would hope so, but I think that's a conversation that we need to have as we move, you know, when we move into the next consolidated plan year is, you know, what is the most effective use of these additional dollars? So I think so, but again, I just want to make it clear that one of the issues we run up with 9% tax credits is the state only gets a certain allocation, right? So even if we had all the soft money in the world, there is still some limit to that.
4%.
Right, 4% does not have that limit, again, but again, getting to the cost and how we leverage money and our most effective use of the money, there's still very expensive deals for the city as far as how much soft money we have to put in per unit, so I think we would want to look at, are there ways for us to maybe do 4% deals that aren't quite as expensive to the city. But I think that's part of the conversation to have.
And that's why the housing plan is so important.
Yes, which is why I totally agree with what you said at the beginning, is the only way for us to get this done is for everybody to be working together and rowing in the right direction. There is really no other way.
All right, well, that's really good to hear. And because, true, the Housing Trust Fund is going to have, and we are looking at, you know, down payment assistance, closing cost assistance for home ownership and things like that also. So, you know, the plan coming together for all those reasons needs to be something that everybody could have their input in and then see how we can move it forward. Not that it's not ever going to be tweaked or changed in the future, because it will.
Definitely a living document.
Right. So, but knowing that if we could all stand behind each other when this rolls out there, it's a very important part and I think a milestone for the city of Philadelphia. So thank you.
Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman Squilla. The chair recognizes Councilwoman Parker.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and Councilman Squilla, thank you very much for your comments. Let me echo the sentiments, and I want you to know I listened very intently to your response to Councilman Johnson, and want to note that I applaud you for giving a holistic perspective about what that very broad term of affordability means for all residents in the city of Philadelphia. During Anna's response to Councilman Johnson, she talked about the funds, you know, not being directed right now towards any specific thing, but that it would go into the general fund, and then that's, you know, what we use to pay for everything. And for me, I'm always concerned about the people who don't work here, who are at home and who are watching, saying, what in the world are they talking about? And so I just want to put a little perspective here. For FY19, our proposed general fund revenues, 35% of them, or $1.596 billion, come from the wage tax, The next largest contributor to the city's general fund revenues are property taxes. And so for those residents who live in neighborhoods throughout the city of Philadelphia, and obviously, you know, this is something of a huge concern to me because I represent a district that is 95% of what is called a middle neighborhood, where people have often watched people attempt to, and this is very frustrating, pit the have-nots against those who are a nickel over, and I call them those who have very little. And I think the reason I was proud to support this proposal and the compromise is that we said all Philadelphians matter from this perspective. Those who need preservation and those who need access to new, affordable units when we want to subsidize those. So it's with that in mind that I want you to talk about the contribution and why preservation is important to the city, especially since 14% of that general fund revenue comes from property taxes. And the city's number, the last time I looked, we were at 52%. 52%. Now, we have a lot of challenges in our city, but that is a great place for Philadelphia to be in, and we want that number to continue going up. Talk about that for a second relative to preservation, home improvement, why that down payment assistance and those closing costs were important.
Yeah, sure. So we do put, the preservation has been a high priority of the city's housing program for a long time, and it continues to be a high priority. And again, because of our favorite catchphrase, but it's also really very true and very valid, is that the most affordable house that we could provide is the one that you're already in. Right? We do not, even with all of the things we're going to try to do at lowering the cost to produce a new unit, it's never going to cost us less to produce a new unit than it costs us to preserve an existing unit and keep somebody there. We also feel that that is one of our most effective tools, frankly, against in preventing homelessness, is we need to do a good job of keeping people in the unit they're already in, but we also need to make sure that that unit that they're in is quality, is a quality, safe, affordable, healthy unit for them. So that's why our preservation programs are so important. In terms of down payment closing cost assistance, it's still in this, where we are, one of the best wealth building tools we have is to own your own home. Unfortunately, as we just said about preservation, for some of our homeowners, that has become a burden, and we are trying to turn that around. But for other folks, it's really important to try to do what we can in order to promote wealth creation by having people own a home. And we know, frankly, that also there's a huge racial disparity in that, and we've got some catch-up to do there. And so that's really important. The down payment and the closing cost assistance is really important. The other piece of that that's really important that we're trying to start conversations with is the way that banks look at credit and providing mortgages. Because it's great if we provide closing costs and down payment assistance, but if a person can't get a mortgage, and not because there's anything really that would prevent them, they just maybe haven't had access to credit or something like that, those are conversations we want to have as well. And again, with the resources available, and I think Anna points out, we're a high poverty city, and we have just so many needs across the board, and it's hard to kind of talk in isolation about any one need and say, hey, all resources should go to this. But that's why we're trying to do what we can to address issues across the board housing-wise, because, it's all sort of this, it's almost like if you pull, it's like a game of Jenga, right? If you kind of pull this one out, this one could fall over here, and you're trying to do your best to keep it all there. And so I think that's why all of these types of things are so important.
Finally, Ann, I want you to, and I heard you mention it briefly earlier, is that aside from the construction tax as proposed, aside from the compromise that we reach, I am proud that this council was sort of ahead of the game relative to this issue of eliminating the backlog for BSRP. And, you mentioned that increase, the very, mild increase to the realty transfer tax that allowed us to fund basic systems, pilot roofing program, adaptive mod, housing preservation, and the heater hotline, those programs with income guidelines that homeowners, some homeowners in the city of Philadelphia who are nickel over are not eligible for that. But we also, at the same time, we're very creative, and I think people across the nation are looking at what we did, this council passed relative to our home preservation program that we hope to get rolling very soon. And so, and that is to make repairs to those properties, get access to the capital, 3%, up to $25,000, 10 years, 580, floor. There is nowhere that you're going to find a banking product on the market now that the average Philadelphian is able to access like this. So I want you to just talk about that, because when we talk about basic systems, we talk about those guidelines, but it's also that other group. So just comment on that program for you, if you will.
Right, so I think, again, that's a really key piece in a very important program, because as you mentioned, our grant programs really serve people at 150% of poverty or less, which is relatively low income, and we have people that are kind of a little bit over that income, but still maybe not at the level where they can walk into a commercial bank and get a home repair loan. So this is really to fill that gap. I think we frankly got great news yesterday when we issued those bonds. We ended up raising $1 million plus more than we had anticipated, so that was really exciting, and we look forward to getting that program rolling. I know it's been a long time coming, but as you said, there's things about that program that probably aren't available anywhere else, and so anytime you want to be aggressive and create something that is a little bit new, maybe a little bit different, maybe a little bit reaches beyond what people are used to, it takes some time for folks to get their head around that and figure that out. But we look forward to continuing to work with your office and getting that program up and rolling, and we hope to get those loans flowing out the door as quickly as possible.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Chair recognizes Councilman Johnson.
Thank you.
Sure.
And I just wanted to make one comment to follow up what my colleague, Sherelle Parker, just talked about, which is very, very interesting. And if I could be supportive of from that aspect, is one, a down payment component. Because again, in Point Breeze, I work with Community Ventures, a couple other nonprofit organizations that help build affordable houses, right? But what we saw was the people who moved into affordable homes. I mean, to be quite frank with you, they weren't African-American people of color. They were like individuals who came from like wealthy backgrounds, but somehow, because they were a college student, their income guidelines fit the criteria. And so we started to do research as an office to find out what was the issue. And we came across the whole redlining issue. And we did hearings regarding redlining and how banks distribute home repair loans, and also opportunities for individuals to be first-time home buyers, but also looking at the issue of making down payments. So from an advocacy standpoint and being supportive, that's something I would like to work with your office on, specifically around redlining, making sure that the banks specifically that do business here in the city of Philadelphia is something that we're looking at. Are those banks that are being good business corporate servants in terms of making sure that if a person is qualified, we're not talking about the 2008, bubble that we went through where people were just getting loans and they couldn't pay for them, but a person is qualified, they have a job. Maybe early on they might have, as a young person, their credit wasn't the best, but they worked it up to the next level, should have that opportunity to participate. And so we are doing some work with a banking coalition, with Urban Affairs Coalition, so any way that we could be supportive specifically on that component, because again, you're talking about poverty and balancing, and I hear you clearly, Anna, when you're saying, listen, we talk not just about housing, but we still gotta put people to work. That's another part of the conversation, right? Specifically on this issue though, I would like to be supportive, because at the end of the day, if you own a home, that's wealth. That's an asset, and a senior shouldn't have to determine, do I pay for my prescription drugs or get my roof fixed? Or do I pay for my taxes or get a railing in my home? you know? So it's these types of programs that help support them, but that down payment component, I'm very interested in, and specifically redlining more than anything else. Just want to say thank you for bringing that comprehensive approach to the table.
Right, well, I think that, in particular with the down payment piece, that's really important, because I think, there is some evidence that part of that reason is because if there's been some ability to have wealth creation over generations, that then the prior generations can help out the new generation with a gift of down payment or closing cost assistance. And so again, we don't want to impede that, but we also want to provide opportunity for other people to have those opportunities. And we understand that, that's a very important place to be able to provide assistance.
Thank you.
I think the whole discussion over the last couple of years has been, and where I initiated this conversation was over the premise that as a city, if we valued mixed income, diverse neighborhoods, then our money and our priorities needed to be very intentional in that goal. And the segregation that exists in the city, and then the wealth segregation that will continue to widen if we're not more intentional in concentrating poverty in certain parts of the city is not the kind of city I want to be part of, right? And I didn't come to council to support that, right? And I sit in this council every day and we approve stuff downtown, don't blink the eye for every tax incentive we can give, and we call it an investment. And then when we talk about neighborhoods, it's an expense. And we got to change that, right? And I think the city, to Councilman O's point is, the city can't be unintentionally hurting people through other policies, right? And I think the poverty discussion that we're having is hugely important. And as a city, and I think the reason why Council President moved for the creation of your position, Ann, was we needed one department really looking at this and calling out their other departments if they're not making the strategic investments in the same way, right? Every investment the city makes has to be around how do we protect, so it's not an either-or conversation, the tax base. How do you grow the tax base? But we can't tell long-term Philadelphia residents that they're an expense, right? And then tell folks that Amazon is an investment. We can't have those conversations. And what I appreciate now is that we can have a conversation where we can call each other out on those things and say we can do both, but we have to do both. It's not one, right? And, I have huge concerns about, when the Amazon deal gets disclosed, what we were willing to do for Amazon that we're not willing to do for Nicetown, that we're not willing to do for Logan, that we're not willing to do for Crescentville, right, as a neighborhood, those types of things. So I think this is a huge step in the right direction, but we need to call ourselves out around some of this stuff, and I'm glad that it's come to the forefront. And that we can have this broader conversation about every neighborhood and people having access to every neighborhood in a real way. And so I think that's been an important part of this. And so we appreciate, Ann, the role that you have, and understand that you're juggling a bunch of things, but that's what leadership is all about, right? So with no other questions, I'm going to ask our second panel, who's been extremely patient. I'm going to call everybody up at one time, and I'm going to ask you guys to stay around in case we have any additional questions, but Nora Lichtash, Herman Parodi, Bianca Barnes, Denise Major, and then Beth McConnell, oh my God, I'm changing your name, and Will Gonzalez. But we'll start with Nora, Herman, Bianca, and Denise. You guys can choose any order you want to start.
morning. My name's Nora Lichtash, and I'm here to talk. I guess I'm here to say that we really care. I'll speak personally for myself and for the coalition too. We care about middle-income neighborhoods. We care about homeowners. We even care about people who are earning 120% of area median income, which is roughly $104,000 in Philadelphia. But we're here today to talk about what you as council members can do in this committee and when it comes to the full committee of the whole to take action, to prioritize the needs of all of us. And I do mean all of us, including your constituents who earn $26,000 or less, to get a fair share, to have an affordable place to live. I think that some of the most recent data I've seen is 26% of the households in Philly earn $15,000 or less. Fully a quarter of your constituents earn $15,000 or less. And when we created, so I'll just say, I'm here as a proud member. I represent the Women's Community Revitalization Project and the Philadelphia Coalition for Affordable Communities. Can we hear it for the coalition? As a coalition, yay. As a coalition, and we're here and we vote. And as a coalition, we've been here for 4 years, and many of us are much longer, pushing for money to fund affordable, accessible housing through our city's Housing Trust Fund. We worked with council members Blackwell, and we really appreciate it, and Blondell Reynolds Brown 13 years ago as part of a larger coalition, but the Coalition for Affordable Housing, to create the Housing Trust Fund. And we had a vision. And we feel that we've met that vision. It's been a really good housing trust fund. And our vision was to make sure that we would lift people up out of poverty and address fundamental human need for all of us to have affordable, safe, accessible, quality housing. It was a great partnership with council, and we really appreciate it because we ensured that half of all the money in the Housing Trust Fund went to households making 30% or less of area median income, $26,000 now. Winning language makes our trust fund a national model, and we get calls all the time. How did you find these elected officials that were willing to stand up for poor people? Where did you find them? And we were very proud that you're our elected officials, and we have stood up for poor people. We care about everyone in the city, and we know that you do too, but we want to make sure that you're prioritizing us. So we're here today to ask you to do the same thing. We know that two of the bills before us, 180740, 180744, are a compromise between council and the mayor. We thank those council members who voted for the construction impact tax. And we remember who you are. And when the mayor wouldn't support it, we negotiated to get a commitment of $71 million over 5 years. We know, like you, that 5-year commitment is not enough. We need to keep working to find a permanent, dedicated source for the Housing Trust Fund. In the meantime, we ask you to vote yes for both of these two bills, 180740, 180744. The bill we're asking you to change is 180739, which you've heard a lot about. The bill amends the Housing Trust Fund to create a new sub-fund. We agree that everyone deserves to have this quality, affordable housing. We're with you. We're with you, but we don't agree with not having a guarantee for low-income Philadelphians. We've heard you say that this is your intent, but we know that council members change over time. There's going to be election in May. Some council members may change. If it's really your intent, we know that if something is not in writing, often it doesn't happen. And we're asking you to please put half of the money that's going into the Housing Trust Fund, whether it's in a sub-fund or not, for affordable housing for your constituents. Unless you make half of those resources in the Housing Trust Fund for 30%, we're asking you to vote no on Bill 180739. We're asking you to stand with us to ensure that Philly is a city for all of us.
Good morning, Council. My name is Denise Major. I'm not feeling too good today. You know me, but my voice is kind of weak today. I'm not feeling well. But I'm glad I was afforded an opportunity to come out about affordable housing. Now, I'm like 50-something. I lived in this city all my life. I remember when I was asked to speak, I thought to myself, I should write stuff down. But I said, no, I want to talk to you straight from my heart. Because if I'm talking to you straight from my heart, the best thing I could do is tell you my truth. And my truth is that my son is 36, and I had to go into housing when he was about 2. I was glad because my income was only $316 a month at the time. So how could you live? I was in an apartment initially. My rent was $250. I had utilities. I had to buy him clothes. My voice is fading in and out, so it's not that I'm about to cry, no. But, so what happened was, I was glad I had an opportunity to get into PHA. PHA afforded me an opportunity to get a job. And I was always taught that if you teach a person how to fish, then they'll know how to survive, basically. I've heard a lot of cliches over my life, and those cliches are starting to fade nowadays. People get up, and then they forget one day you can fall down. And just as life did for me, I was up, I built the Phillies ballpark, National Constitution Center. There's nothing weak, nothing about me at all. I've spoke, and I'm a true advocate for home care work. That's what I do now, because I took an opportunity to take my son away from Lindenfield projects when he turned 18 back then, because I saw the area changing. But however, he went back into the neighborhood, and when he went back to visit his friends, one of his stupid friends found a gun and he got shot. So that's what made me become a home care worker. I'm still surviving. I'm not going to be weak about it. I'm going to speak for affordable home care, because now my son is 36. He needs his own space. So I live with the fact that I had to let him have his space, and I had to have mine. But with the way the market is today, I'm glad for Templetown. I'm glad for LaSalle College. I'm glad for upcoming Drexel. But in the midst of all this upcoming, this stuff is all great. Don't forget about those people who might have been up, went down, and I implore to you and I plead with you. You all said when you were running for office, we would do this, we would do that, we were going to try to help out this cause, that cause. This is a cause that's people's livelihoods. Shelters are so overfilled now. They're overfilled by the buckets. If you call the shelter, you can't even get in. You almost got to know somebody that can make room to put someone in. And then I see in my neighborhood that now the houses and the places that I rent are so much more higher till I'm working over 80 hours a week. That is something's really wrong just to maintain. Kids should have their own when they get grown, and we should have ours. Now I have to contemplate the thought, do I go back and live with my son, even though I'm trying to teach him to live independently with his issues, because I'm not here forever. But I just implore you all to set aside egos and set aside different situations, well, this, that, and the third. These are people's real lives. I am a face of poverty, and I want to come and give my truth.
Good morning. Workout? Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the City Council Appropriations Committee. I am Herman Parodi, and I am the President of Disabled in Action of Pennsylvania. For 45 years, the disabled community, Disabled in Actions, our mission has been to advance the disability rights, including fair housing rights for all of us in our city. DIA is one of the oldest grassroots organizing groups of people with disabilities in the United States. DIA has advocated for increased affordable, accessible, and integrated housing for our city's many low-income people with disabilities and seniors. We are proud members of the past Affordable Housing Coalition and founding members of the current Philadelphia Coalition for Affordable Communities. For decades, we have fought to end the institutional bias in our long-term care system, so people can move out of nursing homes, like many, over 40 nursing homes we have in Philadelphia, to live independent lives like mine in the community. I am a city resident, and I live independently in my own home in the 7th District. When DIA and the coalition now, while we applaud and fully support the plan increased for $70 million in revenue for housing in our city, we are here to clearly oppose the unnecessary creation of a new sub-fund that the Bill 180739 would establish, separate from the existing housing trust, as originally passed and signed into law in June 2005. After the collaboration of the Philadelphia Housing Coalition, disability advocates, and many housing stakeholders, City Council, and the leadership of Janine and Councilwoman Blondell Reynolds Brown, we passed a very good housing trust fund. This landmark bill ordinance established the city's first ever trust fund because our City Council found that there was a critical shortage of affordable, accessible housing in our city, and many low-income renters and homeowners, including people with disabilities and seniors. Today, the criteria needed continues as our city is ranked #1 in poverty, as we heard a lot earlier discussed. And just recently, the Pew Foundation released a study that shows that 60% of Philadelphia is made up of people with disabilities and seniors. The city's own research confirms this, and furthermore, how Philadelphian households are cost burdened because they spend more than 30% of their income in our expensive housing costs. One of the most important pieces of the current Housing Trust Fund is Section 211634, which specifically requires that no less than 50% of the Housing Trust Fund monies must go into the development of housing projects that benefits households like we benefit of that live on 30% less or less of the median income. Our vast majority of our cities' disabled communities are part of this community. The other 50% of the current Housing Trust Fund is to be used for housing development of earnings between 50 up to 115% of housing of median income. This is what was established by you, and we support this. This was very carefully struck balance to ensure for future housing development in our city that is fair and equitable. Additionally, the Housing Trust Fund requires that at least 10% of the newly constructed units must be accessible to renters or owners with mobility disabilities, and including those with wheelchairs. This is in Section 211636. And wisely, all units must be visitable, or alternatively, required to pay an in-lieu fee of $3,000 per unit constructed in the Housing Trust Fund. Since the inception of the Housing Trust Fund, we have worked well. This has helped hundreds of people, if not thousands. We know it's been thousands. And we look forward to many more development of affordable units, housing, affordable housing, and not only the development, but their maintenance. By no means has our city won the war on poverty and met the rapidly increased demand for affordable, accessible housing. However, the Housing Trust Fund has proven to be a vitally important resource for our city's poorest and most vulnerable residents. As elected officials, public servants, and housing advocates, we must ask, why would we undermine an innovative housing trust fund that has been recognized so greatly across our nation? Why would anyone want to undermine this housing trust fund? The bad news is that this bill, 180739, referred to as the sub-fund, co-sponsored by Council members Maria Quiñones Sanchez, Mark Squilla, and Council President Darrell Clark, does just that, undermine what we worked for over a decade now. Instead of putting desperately needed money into the Housing Trust Fund, this bill would put the $70 million that we were just talking about in a new city revenue. Expired property tax abatements is what you guys are calling it, into a separate sub-fund, and we clearly do not support this. And from the conversations that we heard from the panel earlier, does not sound like something the city wants to do. Let it be noted that in Section 211603 of the Housing Trust Fund, it requires that at least half goes to the development of accessible housing for people earning a median income of less than 30%, and the other half if for those above. Furthermore, this ill-advised legislation would not require any of the $70 million to comply with the Housing Trust Fund strategically important construction requirement of the 10% fully accessible units and 100% of the visibility, thereby ignoring the city's growing need for accessible housing. Disabled in Action, Philly Adapt, tenants and future tenants of our city, and the disabled community all strongly encourage that the Appropriations Committee today vote no on Bill 180739. Instead, we ask that the $70 million go into the Housing Trust Fund, as it will ensure that this new revenue is used openly and transparently, and it reaches our city's most needed. Affordable, accessible, integrated housing is a human right that we believe our city council will today enforce. Thank you.
Good morning. Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the City Council Appropriations Committee. My name is Bianca Walladine, and I am the Executive Director of Liberty Housing Development Corporation. Liberty Housing's Development Corporation's mission is to acquire and develop affordable, accessible housing and integrated housing for the city's many low-income people with disabilities and seniors. I am a resident and proud homeowner. Liberty Housing Development Corp. is also a proud member of the Philadelphia Coalition for Affordable Communities. The majority of our housing units are used to provide transitional housing in the community for people that we assist with moving out of nursing homes, especially the Philadelphia nursing home. While we applaud and fully support the planned increase of $70 million in the revenue for housing in our city, we are here to clearly oppose the unnecessary creation of a new subfund, Bill number 180739, separate from the existing Housing Trust Fund as originally passed and signed into law in June 2005. After collaboration with the Philadelphia Affordable Housing Coalition, disability advocates, and many housing stakeholders, City Council, with the leadership of Councilwoman Janie Blackwell, Blondell Reynolds Brown, have passed the original Housing Trust Fund. This landmark city ordinance established the city's first ever trust fund because City Council found that there was a critical shortage of affordable, accessible housing for the city's many low-income renters and homeowners, which includes people with disabilities and seniors. Today, that critical need continues as our city is ranked #1 in the country for poverty of any major city in the U.S. A recent research study by Pew, which Herman also mentioned, that our city has 16% of our population are people with disabilities. To give you a real number, that's 246,000 individuals living with a disability. One of the most important parts of the current Housing Trust Fund is Section 21-1603-4, which specifically requires that no less than 50% of the Housing Trust Fund monies must be used to develop housing projects that benefit households with low incomes of 30% or less of the area median income. The vast majority of our city's residents with disabilities and seniors fall into this low-income category. The other 50% of the current Housing Trust Fund is to be used for housing development for households earning 50% up to 115% of the area median income. This was a carefully struck balance to ensure the future of housing development in Philadelphia that is fair and equitable. Additionally, the Housing Trust Fund required that at least 10% of the newly constructed units must be accessible to renters and owners with mobility disabilities, including those using wheelchairs. See Section 21-1603-6, and wisely, all units must be visitable or alternatively required to pay in lieu of fee of $3,000 per unit constructed in the Housing Trust Fund. Since its inception, our Housing Trust Fund has worked well and has helped fund the development of many units of affordable, accessible housing. LHDC on at least 4 projects has received money from the Housing Trust Fund to build affordable, accessible housing for many of our clients. By no means has our city won the war on poverty or met the rapidly increasing demand for accessible, affordable housing. However, the Housing Trust Fund has proven to be a vitally important resource for our city's poorest and most vulnerable residents. As elected officials, public servants, and housing advocates, we must ask, why would we undermine an innovative housing trust fund that is working so effectively? Instead of putting desperately needed money into the Housing Trust Fund, this bill would put $70 million of new city revenue into a separate sub-fund that specifically is exempt from the Housing Trust Fund's existing Section 21-1603 requirement that at least half goes to develop affordable, accessible housing for households earning 30% or less of AMI. Furthermore, this ill-advised legislation would not require any of the $70 million to comply with the Housing Trust Fund's strategically important construction requirement of 10% fully accessible units and 100% visibility, thereby ignoring the city's growing need for accessible housing for our city's many low-income individuals and persons with disabilities and seniors. In conclusion, Liberty Housing Development Corporation, our many tenants, future tenants, and the disability community strongly encourage that the Appropriations Committee vote no on this bill. Instead, we ask that the $70 million of new city revenue be put into the existing Housing Trust Fund to ensure that this new revenue reaches our city's neediest households and disabled community. Thank you.
Thank you. The chair recognizes Councilman O.
Thank you very much. So, you know, we're all different elected officials, and nobody has ownership of the greatest idea in the world. We just think we do, and I think I do. I'm confused because you're talking about $70 million over 5 years. That's $14 million per year that you're advocating for. And you did not support my charter change bill in our conversations. You did not support a charter change that would simply put $50 million into the housing trust over 5 years. That would be $250 million. So could you explain to me why you would not want to pursue $50 million a year, simple, straightforward, charter change every year, $50 million, which would be $250 million on top of the 14 and 16 million you get every year, but come here and say that we shouldn't make amendments for flexibility because you want the $19 million or $14 million or whatever it is into a specific part. What am I missing in this conversation?
So this is a two-part
Anybody.
answer, but Councilman O, do you know what the maximum amount we've ever gotten into the Housing Trust Fund in any 1 year is?
Say that again?
I asked you the question if you know the maximum amount that the city has been able to put in to the Housing Trust Fund through the current sources in any 1 year.
I thought it was like 14 to 16 million dollars.
Exactly.
Right.
And that, exactly.
So-
And 14 million.
Yeah.
So for us, I just want to answer this in two ways. My
Okay.
first answer is getting that 14 million into the Housing Trust Fund. And again, that is really key to us. We need more money in the Housing Trust Fund. We need more money to serve folks who are at 30% of AMI. I did not see your legislation. The coalition can look at your legislation, but right now we're here to talk about the Housing Trust Fund.
I'm
and we
going to
hope that
disagree
you'll vote
with that. I
us.
have provided that legislation, the charter change. I've met with a number of you. You said, hey, $50 million is not enough every year, but it's a start. And then later you said, well, we're not supporting that. We want the 1% construction tax. That's what I heard. Am I wrong?
It's my understanding that the 1% construction tax would have garnered almost 49 million last year. I think that we wanted to go with something that we felt had legs, where most people were in support of it and would pass. We're very willing to work with you in the future, and we look forward to working with you over the election season. But right now, today, we're here to talk about the Housing Trust Fund and the sub-fund.
Well, the election season is irrelevant to me in this conversation. I don't know why you bring it up. The issue is simply this, and I don't agree with 49 million last year. The numbers that I heard from the administration were more like 22, 24 million at best, and it's a kind of a number that is up for grabs. depending on what happens with a number of things. And the mayor and the administration said it would cost more money to administrate that. And anyway, we have reached a compromise, which is fine, and that's why we're talking about this. But when you're saying that we're not doing enough, and it's as simple as putting more money into housing trust fund, but you don't support a charter change that would just straight up put money into the housing trust fund, even if you didn't think you would get it, it appears to me there are complexities to this problem that I am not aware of, and you're not able to explain to me what the differences are.
If I may, I stand on the initial part that I have not read your charter, and I will definitely do that tonight. What I believe we are here to ask is, and I believe I testified this not too long ago, any new monies that are going to go to housing assistance, we are demanding that half of that money goes, that money goes into the housing trust fund, and half of it is used as it was established to be used, for half of it to be 30, for people living on 30 and less of AMI, and the other half to help build up our city as we want.
So I do hear that, and you and I have had this conversation. I'm very sympathetic to your conversation. I've also heard from the administration and my colleagues that they will get more done with flexibility than they will with this current housing trust fund, that the current housing trust fund, this is what I'm hearing, tell me if I'm wrong, is not doing the job and will not do a better job in the future given the circumstances. They want the flexibility to do partnerships with innovative, creative folks that they can deal with to provide more housing impact than less.
This is really not my fight, but I'm here to fight it anyway. But I feel like this. There's more people in this city right now that are more poverty-stricken than anything. And it's great that you want to take some of the money and allot it to other places to make the money grow. It's all fine and well. But again, if you don't try to take care of those that are less of, how do you expect this great city of ours to keep on growing? I mean, like I said in my speech, and I meant from my heart, that if you teach me how to do something, I don't mind doing it. I'm not asking for a hand up, I'm just asking for a hand out. And I don't mind that. That's why when I was in the PHA, living, they gave me a job and they was teaching me how to grow. Okay, so, you know, it's money. But then look at people's faces and look at their hearts and look at what people actually go through. Stop reading a code or a zoning notice and really get down to talking to people sometimes and stop forgetting.
And in the question that you asked in the flexibility, how is the housing trust fund? I mean, something that it has worked. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think it's worked.
Yeah, the way that it was established has worked since 2005 to today. How would this sub-fund be differently innovative than what we know works and helps our community? And I mean that as our full city.
So you're asking that question, and what I've heard today is that while it is innovative and it has worked, it hasn't worked well enough, that there's a lot of people within the 150,000 people who are under 30% of AMI that are not being serviced, and there is a growing number of people who are going to enter the 30% below if things are not done and more money isn't provided, and more flexibility to work with private developers and other entities is not explored by each district council person who has the most knowledge of their district and has the ability to do exactly what you said, devote it all to below 30% AMI, or to work in other ways as they see fit to ensure that their neighborhoods and communities are best served by the funds that are available.
I want it to be clear that 50% of the current housing trust fund goes to households earning 50 to 115% of area median income. That's the community you just mentioned, correct? So half of the money, the housing trust fund does not fully, 100% of that money is not used, as I think I just heard you say, to people earning 30% and less. That is incorrect. Half of that money is used for that. The other half is for people, households between 50 and 115% of our income. We're putting at a household of only almost $700,000 a year.
And so we
Thank you.
encourage you to take half of the money and experiment with it. But I believe that the experiments will not serve people at 30% or below. And I've been doing 30% or below for 32 years. So I'm very open to that with the other half. But with one half, we'd like to see it in writing that it goes to our people.
I will make this available. There's a copy for a report on our housing preservation from 2014 to 2018. Just to give you an example, basic systems repair, 100% went to 30% AMI, even though we have a 50% threshold. Our roofing program, 56%. Our adoptive modification, 68%. Our targeted preservation program, 57%. Our heater hotline, 85%. So the numbers don't bear out. So thank you very much for your
And
testimony.
those folks are all homeowners. If we talk about the number of units that are created for people at 30% or below, new units, it is very few of them.
Thank you. Thank you for your testimony. Our next witnesses is Beth McConnell and Will Gonzalez. Did you want to say something? Thank you, folks. Thank you for your patience.
Afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity to testify, Chairwoman Sanchez. My name is Beth McConnell. I'm the Policy Director for the Philadelphia Association of Community Development Corporations. I'm testifying today not only on PACDC's behalf, but also on behalf of a number of other organizations that really wanted to be here today to testify, but are very hard at work, fortunately for us, are very hard at work in our neighborhoods and could not attend. And those organizations include Asociación Puertorriqueños en Marcha, ASE, Habitat for Humanity Philadelphia, LISC Philadelphia, Mount Vernon Manor CDC, New Kensington CDC, the People's Emergency Center CDC, Project Home, and Rebuilding Together Philadelphia. We support the passage of bills number 180739, 180740, and 180744, and I don't need to explain to you what those bills do, as you know. And we also applaud Mayor Kenny and City Council for reaching the agreement and want to specifically acknowledge the leadership of Councilwoman Sanchez, Council President Clark, and Councilman Squilla for sparking the policy debates here in Council that led to these agreements today. As you know, PACDC and our members advocated strongly for language in the sub-fund ordinance to guarantee that at least half of the revenue go to support households under 30% AMI. While we are disappointed that that language was not included, we do still support this package of bills and remain committed to advocating that as decisions are made about how the resources were spent, the lowest income households are the priority. We can still use portions of those funds for moderate income households to help them preserve their homes and help them become homeowners. This work has real value in all of our neighborhoods, but particularly in middle neighborhoods and in rapidly gentrifying neighborhoods where moderate income residents are getting priced out. So we think we can do both and improve the quality of life for our lowest income households that are severely harmed by the lack of affordable homes and who are desperate for help. The agreement that is being considered today is a significant investment in the affordable housing needs of Philadelphians. But with more than 100,000 households searching for safe, quality, affordable homes, and I'm sorry, I should correct that, more than 100,000 extremely low-income households searching for safe, affordable homes. We cannot stop here. We applaud Council for pledging to find ways to boost the investment over the next 5 years to a minimum of $100 million, and we stand ready to work with you to make that happen. We also call on Council and the Kenney administration to agree to a mechanism to make these annual appropriations permanent and dedicated so that they extend through FY24 and beyond. Again, thank you, City Council and Mayor Kenney, for this significant step in solving Philadelphia's growing affordability crisis.
Thank you. Thank you. Will?
Buenos dias. Good morning. My name is Will Gonzalez. I'm the Executive Director of SEBA. SEBA is a coalition of Latino community-based organizations in Philadelphia, which includes Esperanza, Concilio, the North Square Community Alliance, and Finanta. SEBA's mission is to promote the economic development and financial inclusion of Philadelphia's Latino community through collaborations and advocacy aimed at ensuring access to quality housing. SEBA supports the passage of all three bills, 180739, 180740, and 180744. Thank you, Councilwoman Sanchez, Council President Clark, and Councilman Squilla in leading the efforts in City Council over the last few years to address issues related to affordable housing and equitable development. We thank you for reaching a compromise with the mayor that resulted in the bills now before you and the promise to continue to tackle these issues. The mayor will be issuing a housing action plan soon. We hope that City Council becomes fully engaged in that effort to forge a holistic roadmap to equitable development for Philadelphia. Any housing action plan will need resources to successfully carry it out. We see these bills as a good beginning, not the only source of resources and legislation to execute the plan. Accordingly, we respectfully request that Council continue to work hard to find ways to boost the mayor's commitment to invest in the Housing Trust Subfund. This includes raising the investments outlined in the bills before you to at least $100 million over the next 5 years. We also respectfully request that you codify similar annual appropriations for beyond fiscal year _24. Ensuring that we secure at least $100 million over the next 5 years is important to address the needs of households under the 30% AMI. This is vital to the Latino community of Philadelphia, as Hispanics have the highest rate of poverty in this city, and the Hispanic community is expected to grow. However, we also recognize the benefits to our children of supporting middle-income families and promoting mixed-income communities. Ensuring that the commitment is at least $100 million over the next 5 years will help in ensuring that many of the resources are earmarked to address housing challenges for low-income people. To further guarantee the outcome of helping low-income families, we respectfully request that you find a way to get the new Housing Trust Fund to commit at least half of the new investment to support households in the 30% AMI. We respect your work at arriving at a compromise and understand that these type of things are very difficult. Compromise is not a dirty word. It is one of the key ingredients used to make democracy work. We urge you to continue working hard on affordable housing issues. Although perfection is elusive when it comes to legislation, we know that the quest for excellence in its execution is possible. Gracias for giving us the opportunity to testify today. We remain committed to working with you on equitable development issues.
Thank you. Any questions from our witness? Seeing none, anyone else here to testify on these bills? The Committee on Appropriations will now go into its public meeting. The chair recognizes Councilman Kenyatta Johnson for a motion on Bill 180739, 180740, and 180744.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I move that Bill number 180739, 180740, and 180744 be reported from this committee with a favorable recommendation, and further move that the rules of council be suspended to permit first reading of this bill at this next session of council. Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposition? Seeing none, it has been moved and properly second that Bill number 180739, 180740, 180744 be reported from this committee with a favorable recommendation, and further move that the rules of council be suspended to permit first reading at our next council session. This concludes the public meeting of the Appropriations Committee. Thank you all. Thank you all for coming.